There's a quiet truth that hangs over our heads every night. Among the thousands of stars that twinkle in the terrestrial darkness, there's a point of light that isn't a star. It's Venus, the brightest planet in the solar system after our moon. For romantics, it's the beacon that heralds the sunset. For ancient sailors, the morning star that promises a new dawn. For poets, the first light of hope on the evening horizon. But for modern science, Venus is literally the closest hell to Earth. Imagine a world where there has never been a single day of peace, where every square inch of soil has been in constant turmoil for millions of years. The Venusian surface isn't just hot. It's a dry ocean of molten rock where the temperature never drops below 870 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that in perspective, it's hot enough to melt zinc, lead, and even some types of bronze in a matter of minutes. The sky? There is no sky on Venus as we know it. There is only an endless layer of golden yellow. Clouds that stretch up. The atmospheric pressure is 9, and yet we ask, what if we dared to challenge the impossible? This is the paradoxical nature of humanity. We were not programmed to accept limits. When we see a mountain impossible to climb, we build gear to climb it. When we encounter impassable oceans, we invent ships to cross them. When we discover we can't fly, we create mechanical wings. And when we look at Venus, this world that should be untouchable, this planet that screams, "Stay away," we whisper back, "What if I could live there?" The documentary that now unfolds isn't just about remote scientific possibilities. It's about the spiritual DNA of our species. It's about what happens when beings created in the image of God look at a seemingly cursed world and decide to turn it into a home. It's about the courage to reimagine not just where we can live, but who we can become. Over the next few minutes, we'll dive together into this seemingly impossible future. We'll explore the first technological suits that would protect us from the stone-melting heat. We'll investigate the radical biological transformations our bodies would need to undergo to survive unprotected. We'll walk through the first cities suspended above clouds of acid, and we'll follow the slow metamorphosis of our species into something that perhaps is no longer completely human. But before we begin this journey, pause for a moment and consider this. Venus is just. This makes us think. If God created a planet so close and yet so radically different from Earth, what other mysteries exist waiting to be discovered in the universe? What other impossibilities are just waiting for someone to dare to dream of them? Perhaps Venus was not created to be inhabited in the traditional way. Maybe it's there to teach us something deeper, that the greatest treasures are always hidden in the most improbable places, that the journey to conquer the impossible is more valuable than the conquest itself, that the creator of the universe gave us minds capable of dreaming of stars precisely because he wanted us to reach them. Venus was not made for us, at least not as we are now. But perhaps, just perhaps, we can remake ourselves for it. The adventure that is about to begin will forever change the way you see not just distant planets, but also the infinite potential that exists within yourself. Because if we can imagine a way to live in the hell of Venus, what other impossibilities can we turn into reality? The journey begins now, and it starts with a simple yet revolutionary question. What would you do if you knew it was impossible to fail? If this kind of content sparks your imagination and faith, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who loves to explore the mysteries of the universe. The first attempt to survive on Venus wouldn't begin with heroic courage or leaps of faith. It would begin with scientific humility, with the admission that the human body, in its current form, simply wasn't designed for this kind of challenge. We would need help. We would need a second skin. We would need an engineering miracle. The first Venusian suits wouldn't look anything like the bulky spacesuits we see in sci-fi movies. Those cumbersome, rigid suits, like medieval armor adapted for space, would be completely useless on Venus. Instead, imagine something that looks more like a second layer of life, an artificial skin that breathes, feels, reacts, and automatically adapts to the extreme conditions. The base material would be a revolutionary biofabric, carbon nanotube fibers interwoven with programmable artificial cells. These cells wouldn't just be passive like regular fabric. They would be actively responsive, capable of detecting changes in the environment's temperature, pressure, and chemical composition, and adjusting their properties in real time. When the external temperature rose, the fibers would rearrange to reflect more heat. When the pressure increased, they would strengthen to better distribute the mechanical stress. But the real miracle would be in the integrated life support system. Within the suit's layers, microscopic biochemical reactors would work around the clock, performing a constant molecular alchemy. They would capture the poisonous carbon dioxide from the Venusian atmosphere and, through advanced enzymatic processes, convert it into breathable oxygen. Every breath would literally be a transformation of poison into life. To deal with the extreme heat, the suit would use a multi-layered liquid cooling system. It wouldn't just be a portable air conditioner, it would be a complex network of artificial capillaries circulating super-chilled fluids throughout the entire body. Imagine extra veins running just beneath the artificial skin, carrying a metallic blood that never heats up, no matter how hellish the external environment is. Protection against pressure would be another monumental challenge. Venus's atmospheric pressure would literally crush an unprotected human body in seconds. The suit would need to function as an internal and external exoskeleton simultaneously. Layers of pressurized gel between the fabric fibers would evenly distribute the external force, while a flexible skeleton of a titanium alloy would provide structural support without limiting mobility. And then there's the issue of sight. The dense clouds of sulfuric acid would render normal vision completely useless. The suit's helmet would be equipped with a multispectral imaging system, capable of seeing through infrared, ultraviolet, and even using active sonar to map the environment. The person inside the suit wouldn't see Venus with their own eyes. They would see a translated, interpreted, and augmented version by the system's artificial intelligence. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the first Venusian suits would be how they would affect the fundamental human experience of being alive. Inside the suit, you wouldn't feel the wind, even though Venusian winds blow at more deeply disturbing. You couldn't touch anything directly. Your hands, covered by smart gloves with haptic feedback, would only simulate the sensation of touch through vibrations and controlled pressure. You would live on Venus, but you would never really touch it. You would be present, but always separated by layers of protective technology. Loneliness would be inevitable, even if other people were nearby. Also, in their own suits, communication would be limited to electronic signals. No facial expressions, no subtle body language, none of the million tiny non-verbal cues that make human connection possible. Just distorted voices coming through communication systems. And yet, this would be our first cry of victory against the impossible. We would be able to take the first steps on a world that should kill us instantly. We would survive for a few hours, maybe a few days, in conditions that would make the Sahara Desert seemed like a tropical paradise, but this first conquest would also reveal an uncomfortable truth. Being able to survive on Venus and being able to live on Venus are two completely different things. The suit would allow us to exist there, but not to belong there. We would be eternal visitors, technological tourists in a world that would never truly accept us. And that would lead us to the next inevitable question. What if we wanted more than just to survive? What if we truly wanted to belong? For that, we would need something much more radical than technology. We would need to rewrite the fundamental code of human life. There comes a moment in every great journey when we realize we can't just bring our old world with us. To truly inhabit Venus, not just to temporarily survive there, but to call that planet home, would require a transformation so radical that it would challenge our very definition of humanity. Natural evolution took millions of years to adapt terrestrial life to Earth's environment. We didn't have millions of years. We only had our intelligence, our technology, and our seemingly infinite determination to turn the impossible into the inevitable. Let's start with blood, that red river that carries life through our veins. Human blood is mostly water, and water simply cannot exist in a liquid state on the surface of Venus. At 870 degrees Fahrenheit, our blood plasma would turn to vapor in fractions of a second. The solution would require a complete reinvention of the concept of circulation. Imagine a transport fluid based not on water, but on specially developed liquid metals. An alloy of gallium, indium, and tin that remains liquid even at extreme temperatures, suspended in a matrix of smart nanoparticles capable of carrying oxygen, nutrients, and chemical information through the body. This new blood would be silvery gold, shining softly through translucent skin. The human heart, that delicate muscle pump, could never pressurize such a dense fluid. In its place, a hybrid organ, part biological, part magnetic, a heart that would function through controlled electromagnetic fields, silently pumping without the need for violent muscle contractions. The heart rate would no longer be heard as beats, but felt as gentle pulses of energy. The lungs, those delicate balloons that expand and contract with every breath, would be totally dysfunctional in an atmosphere of pressurized carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid. Breathing as we know it would simply cease to exist. In place of lungs, imagine completely new structures, internal bioreactors that function like the extremophile bacteria found in volcanic hot springs. These organs wouldn't breathe in the traditional sense. Instead, they would extract chemical energy directly from the toxic gases in the environment, transforming poison into cellular fuel through biochemical processes that never naturally existed on Earth. The sensation of breathing, that fundamental experience of being alive, would be replaced by something more subtle, a constant flow of chemical energy through the body, a current of vitality that never stops, never accelerates, never gets out of breath. Human skin, that soft and sensitive border between us and the world, would be completely inadequate for an environment of acid rain and intense radiation. In its place, something would grow that seems to have come from a strange dream. Plates of organic silicon, flexible as skin, but resistant as natural armor. These plates would not just be protective, they would be interactive, capable of photosynthesis using sunlight filtered through the acid clouds, contributing to the body's nutrition. Capable of detecting chemical changes in the environment and automatically adjusting their permeability, capable even of communication, subtly changing color to transmit emotional states or important information. The texture would be strange, not smooth like human skin, but faceted like microscopic crystal. Scales. To the touch, if touch were still possible, it would be like feeling living metal, warm and responsive, but fundamentally different from anything organic. Human eyes, designed to detect visible light in a transparent atmosphere, would be useless amidst Venus's perpetual golden clouds. Vision would need to be completely reinvented. Imagine eyes that don't see light, but heat. Sensory organs capable of detecting infrared radiation with microscopic precision, allowing for navigation through a world where temperature differences are the only available visual clues. These new eyes would shine with a soft internal light, like red embers on faces of living metal. But perhaps even stranger, the ability to sense magnetic fields, completely new sensory organs that would allow them to perceive the planet's magnetic currents, navigating Venus like migratory birds navigate Earth. The world would be experienced not just as a visual landscape, but as a three-dimensional ocean of invisible energy. Verbal communication would be impossible. Flesh vocal cords would disintegrate instantly in the corrosive atmosphere. In their place, sonic communication organs that work through deep vibration, not speech, but music. Conversations that happen through frequencies that cross the dense atmosphere like wordless songs. Imagine people communicating through bodily symphonies, each emotion expressed as a different note, each complex thought as a melody, each conversation as an improvised musical. Collaboration. Language would cease to be verbal, to become purely harmonic. The end result would be creatures who were once human, but would now belong to Venus as much as they did to Earth. Short, stocky bodies, adapted to the extreme pressure, golden crystal skin shining under the filtered light, eyes that emanate red heat instead of white light, voices that sing instead of speak, still intelligent, still conscious, still capable of love, art, dreams, and awe, but fundamentally transformed into something that their terrestrial ancestors might not recognize as family. The price of total conquest would be total metamorphosis. We wouldn't just live on Venus, we would become Venusians. The question that would remain echoing through the generations would be simple yet devastating. Is it worth conquering a world if we lose ourselves in the process? If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments, would you live on Venus? And what city are you watching this documentary from? Let's chat in the comments. What would it be like to wake up every morning in a world where there is no morning? What would it be like to live where every day is exactly the same as the last for millions of years? What would it be like to build a life, a family, an entire society on a planet that has never known softness? The first Venusian communities would not be born on the rocky ground. They would be born floating in the clouds, 50 kilometers. 3. Imagine waking up in an apartment that gently sways with the high-altitude winds, where the windows reveal not a solid horizon, but endless layers of clouds stretching in every direction. There would be no firm ground under your feet, just the constant sensation of being airborne, even when you're sleeping. The cities would be connected by flexible tunnels that stretch and contract with the atmospheric currents, allowing the structures to dance with the winds without losing connection. Passing from one city to another would be like crossing bridges that breathe, that undulate like giant snakes suspended in the air. Over time, as technology advanced, even the Venusian ground would be colonized, but not in the traditional way. Underground cities would be excavated directly into the volcanic rock using plasma lasers, creating vast networks of pressurized and climate-controlled caverns. These subterranean metropolises would connect through armored tunnels, forming an entire civilization below the planet's surface. Food on Venus would be a completely new science. There would be no green farms waving in the wind, no orchards laden with fruit, no herds grazing in open fields. Nature, as we know it, simply could not exist there. In its place, vertical farms would operate inside hermetically sealed bioreactors. Genetically modified microalgae would grow in controlled chemical solutions, capable of thriving in the extreme heat and producing concentrated proteins. Specialized fungi would be cultivated in dark chambers, feeding on the toxic gases of the environment and transforming them into consumable nutrients. Meals would not be solid as we know them. They would be dense and energetic fluids, rich in all the necessary nutrients, but without the texture, taste, or social ritual of eating. Nourishing oneself would be an efficient but pleasureless process, like refueling a biological machine. Locomotion would also be reimagined, with bodies adapted to extreme pressure and muscles strengthened to function in Intense gravity. Venusians would move through short, controlled jumps. Each step would be calculated, each movement conserved to save energy in the dense atmosphere. But perhaps the greatest innovation would be to use the atmosphere itself for transport. The Venusian atmosphere is so dense that relatively small objects could glide for long distances. Foldable metallic wings, controlled by bodily magnetic fields, would allow for short flights between nearby structures. Flying would not be poetic. Freedom, like on Earth, it would be pure practicality. Communication would completely transform human relationships. Without vocal words, without visible facial expressions through protections, without subtle hand gestures, how would people connect emotionally? The answer would be in something completely new: communication through controlled sound frequencies. Each person would be able to generate specific sound waves that carry not just information, but emotion, humor, personality. Conversations would become collaborative symphonies where each participant contributes with unique bodily instruments. Imagine a Venusian family chatting during dinner through complex harmonies, the father expressing work concerns through deep rhythmic notes, the mother responding with comforting frequencies that sonically embrace his worries, the children adding cheerful melodies that turn the conversation into music. Work on Venus would be mainly maintenance and expansion of the survival infrastructure. Specialized teams would maintain the life support systems of the floating cities. Engineers would develop new materials capable of resisting acid corrosion. Biologists would cultivate new life forms adapted to the extreme environment. But there would also be room for art and culture. Venusian art would be based on vibrations, sound frequencies, and heat patterns. Sculptors would work with controlled thermal waves, creating works that exist only as temperature gradients in the air. Musicians would create ambient symphonies that blend with the natural sounds of the planet's atmosphere. The education of children would be fundamental and challenging. How to teach about colors to a generation that has never seen blue, green, or any color other than variations of gold. How to explain the concept of oceans to those who have never seen water in a liquid state. How to preserve Earth's cultural memory in such an alien environment. Venusian schools would become living museums of the terrestrial experience. Holograms and sensory simulations would allow children to virtually experience the feel of grass, the sound of rain, the sensation of a gentle breeze on their faces. These experiences would become almost mystical, sacred moments of connection with an ancestral world that exists only in digital memories. Time on Venus would be measured in a completely different way. Without cycles of day and night, without seasons of the year, without changes in sunlight, how to mark the passage of time? Venusians would develop calendars based on the energy cycles of the cities, the rotations of the floating structures, the patterns of artificial ventilation. Perhaps the deepest thing would be how they dealt with longing. Without a blue sky to contemplate, without visible stars at night, without a moon waxing and waning, how would people find hope and inspiration? How would they deal with melancholy in a world where the landscape never changes? The answer would be in the community itself. Venusians would develop collective rituals of celebration and remembrance. Perhaps they would celebrate Earth Day with holographic simulations of terrestrial landscapes. Perhaps they would create frequency festivals where the entire city would participate in a gigantic harmonic symphony, uniting voices in a song that crosses the clouds. And even transformed, even adapted to a world that should be impossible, they would still seek beauty. They would still create meaning. They would still love, dream, and hope, because they discovered that humanity is not in the body's form, but in the infinite capacity to find light, even in the deepest darkness. There is a sacred moment in every great conquest when silence descends like snow upon victory, and we finally stop to count the real cost. Not the cost in money, time, or effort. Those are numbers that fit on spreadsheets. But the cost that is only measured when we look in the mirror and no longer recognize who is looking back. For the first Venusians, these extraordinary creatures who were once completely, unquestionably human, that moment would arrive like a silent wave of cosmic melancholy, a growing awareness, slow like the sunrise, that by conquering the impossible, they may have lost something even more precious than life itself, the ancestral definition of home. In armored bodies that don't know the soft touch of a morning breeze, they would carry phantom memories of something called affection. Not the mechanical and calculated contact of metal against metal, but the warm, soft, and inexplicably comforting sensation of human skin against human skin. The hug that calms not just tense muscles, but inner storms we didn't even know existed. The hand that automatically reaches out to comfort someone in pain, without thinking, without calculating energy efficiency, just feeling the ancient and sacred compulsion to alleviate the suffering of another. They would remember, vaguely, like distant echoes, of an almost forgotten song, of lazy afternoons lying on the grass, feeling each green blade tickle their bare skin, of the simple and profound pleasure of walking barefoot on warm sand, leaving temporary footprints that the ocean would erase with tenderness, of the unconscious ritual of stretching their arms upon waking, stretching muscles that slept in peace, not in positions calculated for mechanical efficiency. Without lungs that breathe natural air, that daily miracle we never valued. Properly, they would hold distant memories of something called a sigh, the deep and inexplicable relief of slowly releasing air after a day that tested all the limits of emotional endurance, the breathless gasp of genuine surprise at something so beautiful that it interrupts all thoughts, the air that gets caught in the throat when the heart fills with pure emotion, awe, love, gratitude, and for a moment the whole world pauses to witness the miracle of being alive. The way the very act of breathing automatically connected the inner world with the outer world, creating an invisible but constant bridge between the soul and the universe. How each inhale was a small prayer of gratitude, and each exhale a small offering of peace to the cosmos. Without voices that form words, sing spontaneous melodies, or whisper secrets in the dark, they would carry phantom echoes of conversations that could never happen in the same way again. The specific and unique sound of the laughter of the person they loved. Not just the sound frequency, but the way that laughter warmed the heart and lit up dark rooms. The particular way each important person pronounced their name, carrying decades of shared history in 2 or 3 simple syllables. The lullabies their mothers sang. Imperfect melodies, maybe untrained voices, but laden with love so pure that they transformed simple words into direct bridges to heaven. The stories told by the fire on a cold winter night, where words created entire worlds in the heated air, and each listener became simultaneously audience and participant in the magic of human storytelling. But perhaps the deepest loss, so subtle that it would take years to be fully understood, would be something even more sacred. The ability to be surprised by unplanned beauty. On Earth, beauty arrived like a thief in the night, interrupting routine with moments of pure grace. A sunset that literally stopped conversations in the middle of important sentences. A field of wildflowers that forced hurried drivers to pull over and simply contemplate the generosity of nature. A child laughing with total abandon that made worried adults temporarily forget all anxieties and remember when they themselves laughed like that. The full moon reflected perfectly in a calm lake on a summer night, creating a moment of symmetry so perfect it seemed like a direct window into the mind of God. The first snowflake of winter touching the face with the delicacy of a kiss. The duck unexpected scent of jasmine in the air, instantly transporting them to memories of past springs and promises of future springs. Moments of pure grace that could not be planned, controlled, replicated, or bought. Small daily miracles that constantly reminded them that the world was much larger, much more mysterious, much more generous than any human mind could fully comprehend. On Venus, everything was functional. Everything was calculated for maximum survival efficiency. Everything was necessary, useful, rational. Art existed, yes, but it was art created intentionally in moments and spaces specifically designated for aesthetic experiences. There was no longer the accidental encounter with the transcendent. There was no longer the wild and undisciplined beauty that erupts unexpectedly in the middle of the absolutely ordinary, transforming common Tuesdays into cathedrals of admiration. They adapted so much to the hostile environment, developing systems, protocols, efficiencies, that they lost the capacity to be vulnerable to unprogrammed awe. And perhaps it is exactly this vulnerability that makes us profoundly human, the constant openness to be touched, changed, transformed by things we don't control, don't plan, don't deserve, but that arrive as free gifts from an inexplicably generous universe. The generations born on Venus would face an even more complex and painful existential dilemma. For them, Earth would be just a collection of ancient stories told by grandparents, legends so beautiful that they seemed fabricated by longing and nostalgia, blue oceans stretching to the horizon, green forests whispering secrets in the wind, warm rain falling from the sky like a free blessing, wild animals running free through the landscape with no purpose beyond the joy of being alive, children playing barefoot in open fields, chasing butterflies that exist only to be beautiful. All of this would sound like elaborate fairy tales, fantasy worlds too. Beautiful to be real. How can someone believe in a planet where the very air is a free gift, where water falls from the sky unasked, where beauty exists without function, just for the pleasure of existing? But occasionally, in the depths of the Venusian nights, if we can even call them night, the periods of less activity, in a world where the sun is never visible, some of these second or third generation children would look through the armored windows of their floating cities and feel something completely inexplicable, a cosmic nostalgia for a place they never saw, a genetic longing for a home they never knew, as if the memory of Earth were encoded not just in their minds, but in their very chromosomes, whispering through the generations, "You belong somewhere else. There are worlds where you wouldn't have to work so hard just to breathe." Venusian psychologists, because even in an impossible world there would still be a need to heal wounded souls and broken hearts, would discover a completely new phenomenon in medical literature: emotional inheritance syndrome. People experiencing genetically transmitted longing, as if the collective memories of terrestrial humanity were screaming through their DNA, calling them back home across the cruel vastness of space. Some individuals would try to bravely resist this ancestral melancholy. They would dive even deeper into the emerging Venusian culture, fully embracing their new identity as citizens of the Golden Clouds. They would reject any sentimental connection to the terrestrial past, proudly declaring themselves citizens only of Venus, children only of the stars, heirs only of the future. Earth is the past, they would say through their harmonic communications. We are the future. We are evolution in action. We are proof that humanity knows no true limits. But even these convicted rebels would occasionally wake up from strange and disturbing dreams, where they walked barefoot on something impossible, a soft and green surface that gave way under their feet, but in a comfortable, welcoming way, where they looked up and saw an infinite blue dome, without visible limits, without a roof to protect or imprison them, where they breathed air that tasted of freedom, air that didn't need to be processed, filtered, optimized for survival. They would wake from these dreams with tears of a completely new kind, not tears of sadness for the loss, but tears of longing for something their soul recognized as true home, even though their rational mind knew they could never return. Others would become obsessive preservers of terrestrial culture, dedicating their entire lives to keeping every tradition, every story, every song of the original world alive. They would create elaborate holographic museums where they would recreate, with microscopic scientific precision, every detail of the terrestrial experience. The exact sound of rain on leaves, the specific scent of grass after a storm, the precise texture of sand between their fingers. But gradually, inevitably, their attempts at preservation would become progressively more abstract, more disconnected from the real emotional experience, more academic and less visceral. Earth itself would be transformed into just another object of anthropological study among many, a fascinating but irrelevant ancient culture for everyday Venusian life. And then there would be those, perhaps the wisest, perhaps the most resigned, who would simply accept the loss as the necessary price of greatness, who would understand, with a peace that comes only from profound spiritual maturity, that every great journey requires a sacrifice proportional to its magnitude, who would consciously choose to find meaning not in what they lost, but in what they gained, the extraordinary ability to make the technically impossible become daily possible. The living proof that the human spirit knows no true borders, accepts no permanent limitations, does not surrender in the face of any circumstance, no matter how desperate it may seem. These would be the true sages of Venus, not because they denied the loss, but because they transformed it into wisdom, not because they forgot Earth, but because they honored its memory by becoming capable of flourishing in any soil, even the most impossible. And perhaps they would discover something that terrestrial generations, in their relative ease of life, never had the opportunity to learn, that humanity is not limited to a specific form, a specific planet, a specific definition of life or happiness. That being human is a quality of the soul that completely transcends physical, environmental, or circumstantial limitations. They would learn that it is still possible to love deeply without physical touch, to commune spiritually without speaking words, to find transcendent beauty amid the purest functionality. They would discover entirely new ways of experiencing joy, compassion, awe, and hope. Ways that their terrestrial ancestors, for all their privilege of living in a natural paradise, could never have imagined or needed to develop. But always, like a constant background song in their lives, they would carry the question that defines every great human adventure, every conquest that requires real sacrifice. Was it worth it? By conquering a new world, by definitively proving that we can survive literally anywhere, by demonstrating that our species is truly capable of reaching and inhabiting the most distant stars. Was it worth the intimate and irreversible price we paid? The answer, perhaps, could only be given honestly by future generations, by the great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of the first courageous colonizers, who would look at what their ancestors built, floating cities in the clouds, a prosperous civilization in the midst of the impossible, art and love flourishing where there should be only survival, and say with gratitude, "Yes, you gave us the entire universe. You taught us that there are no true limits, and that was worth any personal price." Or perhaps with an honesty that only temporal distance allows, they would say, "You gave us Venus and the stars, but you lost Earth and innocence, and some things, once lost forever, leave scars on the collective soul that never completely heal." The story had not ended. The answer was still being written silently in the perpetual golden clouds of an impossible planet, by people who were once fully human and were now something new, something that was still discovering, day after day, what it meant to be truly alive among the distant stars. 5 generations after the first pioneers took their first hesitant and heroic steps on the scorching ground of Venus, something truly extraordinary began to slowly emerge from the perpetual golden clouds. Not just adapted survival, not just pragmatic adjustment to circumstances, but something infinitely deeper and more beautiful. A new form of human being was being born among the stars, a form that honored the past while embracing a future that no terrestrial ancestor could have imagined. The Venusian society that flourished was not simply a modified and adapted version of terrestrial culture transplanted to a hostile environment. It was something entirely original, authentically new, a civilization that found ways not just to survive, but to prosper emotionally, artistically, and spiritually in an environment that should have crushed any hope of happiness, creativity, or transcendence. Venusian art evolved into dimensions that went far beyond anything that terrestrials, for all their rich cultural tradition, could have imagined in their most creative dreams. Without the luxury of traditional visual colors to work with, without oceanic blues, forest greens, or the complete rainbow that danced in terrestrial skies, Venusian artists developed a completely revolutionary aesthetic language based on subtle variations in temperature, complex modulations of sound frequency, and precise manipulations of atmospheric pressure. Their galleries were not spaces where you went to see art hanging on walls. They were immersive environments where you didn't passively contemplate art. You experienced it with your whole being. You walked slowly through controlled heat installations that told entire epic stories through carefully orchestrated thermal gradients. Your skin became a canvas, recording complex narratives through sensations of heating and cooling that evoked specific emotions, ancestral memories, even spiritual revelations. You moved through 3-dimensional sound sculptures that existed only as complex harmonies vibrating through the dense atmosphere, creating invisible cathedrals of pure sound that changed and evolved as you approached or moved away, making each visitor simultaneously an audience and a conductor of an always unique symphony. Venusian musicians, the true wizards of this new civilization, created ambient symphonies that blended perfectly with the natural sounds of the planet, turning the entire environment into a gigantic instrument. They learned to use the constant concerts that lasted literally for months, with movements that subtly changed with Venus's atmospheric seasons, creating music that was not just heard, but lived as an integral part of the experience of being alive on the planet. Some compositions were designed to last for entire years, with generations of musicians collaborating to maintain harmonic continuity across decades. Literature flourished in ways that completely redefined the concept of narrative. Without the traditional written word, impossible to preserve in an environment that corrodes any organic material, Venusian poets developed epics transmitted through mathematically precise, modulated frequencies. Poems that existed as complex sound waves, carrying not just intellectual meaning, but pure emotion, ancestral memory, and even mystical experiences directly into the listener's consciousness. Stories that you didn't read silently on a page, but experienced directly through neurological resonance, where each character had their own characteristic sound frequency, each emotion its own harmonic modulation, each plot twist its own musical progression. Reading Venusian literature was like being temporarily possessed by the collective consciousness of the narrative, but perhaps the most profoundly beautiful and touching innovation was how they developed completely new approaches to the emotional and spiritual education of children born among the golden clouds. Venusian schools did not function as terrestrial institutions focused primarily on the transmission of factual information. They were centers for the integral development of the soul, where they taught not only math, science, and history, but disciplines that simply did not exist on Earth because they were not necessary in a naturally welcoming environment. Constructive nostalgia was a fundamental subject. The refined art of feeling deep longing without being destroyed by it, of honoring the past without being trapped in it, of keeping the memory of ancestral Earth alive while building genuine enthusiasm for the Venusian future. Children learned specific techniques to process the emotional heritage they carried in their DNA, transforming longing into fuel for creativity and innovation. Functional beauty was another revolutionary discipline, finding genuine admiration and transcendent inspiration in purely practical environments, discovering the sacred hidden in the necessary, developing eyes capable of seeing miracles in life support systems and survival equipment. Students spent hours contemplating the mathematical elegance of an atmospheric recycling system until they could feel the same reverence that their ancestors felt before a sunset. Advanced harmonic communication went far beyond using sound frequencies to transmit basic information. It was the deep art of using harmonic modulations to create real emotional connection, to offer comfort without words, to express love in ways that completely transcended verbal language. Graduates in this discipline could conduct therapy, mediate conflicts, or even officiate weddings entirely through music. Venusian children learned from an early age that being physically limited did not mean being spiritually limited, that living in an environment that demands constant vigilance did not prevent the flourishing of joy, creativity, or hope. That being radically different from their terrestrial ancestors did not make them less human, just human in a new, adapted, evolved way. Venusian spirituality developed unique traditions that were simultaneously ancient in essence and completely new in expression. Without an open sky to contemplate, without the blue immensity that inspired terrestrial mystics for millennia, they looked inward with an intensity that no terrestrial tradition had needed to develop. Meditative practices based on extreme bodily awareness became central to spiritual life. Each beat of the magnetic heart, each cycle of the internal bioreactors, each flow of metallic blood became a sacred opportunity for connection with the divine. Advanced meditators reported experiences of mystical unity through conscious synchronization with the mechanical rhythms of their own transformed bodies. They developed collective rituals of breathtaking beauty, symphonies of gratitude, where entire cities, tens of thousands of people, simultaneously participated in gigantic harmonic compositions. Their collective voices created music so complex and powerful that it could be felt throughout the entire planetary atmosphere. Waves of sound carrying praise and gratitude to the highest layers of the golden clouds. Celebrations where survival itself became sacred art, where every day lived in the impossible was recognized as a divine miracle worthy of cosmic commemoration. Festivals where children, born in the clouds, sang songs of gratitude for never having known an easier world, because it allowed them to appreciate every moment of life as the supernatural gift that it truly was. They created a unique and deeply moving theology, the belief that God had created Venus specifically as an advanced school to teach humanity that divine love knows no environmental limitations, that if the Creator could make possible not only the survival but the flourishing of life, art, and spirituality in a literal hell, then there was no situation, no matter how desperate, hostile, or impossible, where hope could not take root and flourish. God created Earth to show us his generosity, the Venusian sages taught. But he created Venus to show us his omnipotence. On Earth, we learned that he loves us. On Venus, we learned that his love knows no bounds. Venusian families discovered entirely new and touching ways to express affection, care, and intimacy. without the possibility of traditional physical hugs. Without the simple comfort of skin against skin, they developed frequency hugs, specific sonic modulations, personalized for each relationship that created real sensations of warmth, security, and comfort through direct bodily resonance. Parents sang lullabies through vibrations that calmed not only the auditory senses, but the children's entire nervous system, creating a state of profound peace that went far beyond what any terrestrial song could achieve. These songs were genetically transmitted. Parents instinctively knew the exact frequencies that would calm their own children, as if the music were encoded in the family DNA. Couples developed harmonic dances, where their bodies moved in sync with shared frequencies, creating a form of intimacy that was simultaneously physical, emotional, and spiritual. These dances could last for hours, with partners gradually synchronizing not only their movements, but their magnetic heartbeats, their artificial respirations, even their cycles of cellular energy. The concept of home was transformed in a radical and beautiful way. Home was no longer a specific physical place, a geographical address, or an architectural structure. Home became an emotional frequency, a specific combination of sounds, vibrations, and harmonies that immediately evoked a sense of absolute belonging, unconditional security, and unconditional love. Families created unique harmonic signatures, complex combinations of sounds that were like emotional fingerprints, impossible to artificially replicate. Wherever these family frequencies were reproduced, in any floating city, any subterranean habitat, any corner of the planet, there was home. There was the immediate feeling of being exactly where one belonged. Venusian children carried these harmonic signatures like invisible amulets. No matter how far they traveled for studies, work, or exploration, they could always hear home and instantly feel the connection to family, love, and identity. But perhaps the most revolutionary and spiritually profound discovery was how they developed completely new approaches to death, grief, and the continuity of existence. On Earth, death is often seen as a return to the soil, a natural cycle where physical life returns to the land that nourished it. On Venus, where the ground is perpetual lava and the atmosphere is poison, this concept made no literal sense. So Venusians developed something that was simultaneously more poetic and more scientifically sophisticated, the doctrine of eternal harmonic conservation. When someone died, when their biological, mechanical systems finally ceased to function, their specific frequency signature, the unique combination of sonic modulations that defined their personality, history, and spiritual essence, was carefully preserved and incorporated into the community's permanent ambient music. The person literally became part of the collective symphony that defined the city's sonic identity. Their unique voice continued to contribute to the communal harmony even after the cessation of physical existence. To die was not to disappear. It was to transform into a permanent part of the soundscape that defined home for all future generations. Grief became not a paralyzing sadness for an irreversible loss, but a transformative celebration for the metamorphosis of a loved one into an eternal part of the very definition of communal belonging. The dead were not buried in silent ground or cremated in consuming fire. They were perpetually sung back to life through the collective voices of all who loved them. Generations of families could literally talk with their deceased ancestors through participation in communal symphonies where the frequencies of the dead were technically preserved and spiritually integrated. Death became not an end, but a transformation, from individual to collective, from temporal to eternal, from physical to purely spiritual. And then, as the decades accumulated into Centuries, something even more extraordinary and inspiring happened. Venusians began to look at other stars with the same impossible dream that had once transformed a hellish planet into a home. Venus had been just the beginning, the revolutionary proof of concept that humanity could adapt to literally any environment, no matter how impossible it seemed initially. If they managed to make Venus habitable, if they transformed a hell into a nursery for a prosperous civilization, what other impossible worlds awaited them across the galaxy? Young Venusians began to dream of expeditions to Mercury, where the temperatures made Venus seem temperate, to Europa, Jupiter's icy moon, where they would have to learn to thrive under miles of eternal ice, to Titan, where liquid methane rains create alien landscapes that would challenge even their proven capacity for extreme adaptation. Each world would require even more radical adaptations, even deeper transformations, even more impossible innovations. But they were not afraid. They had learned the fundamental secret that no terrestrial civilization had needed to discover. Humanity was not limited to any specific form, specific environment, or specific definition of life. It was a quality of spirit that completely transcended physical limitations, the inherent capacity to find beauty in any circumstance, create meaning in any environment, and love deeply despite any limitation or challenge. And here is a fact that will expand your mind forever and change how you see your own place in the universe. Venus is almost exactly the same size as Earth. 9. Contemplate this for a moment. This sister planet is immense, a rocky giant practically identical to Earth in scale. Now imagine the infinite greatness, the magnificence that surpasses all understanding of Almighty God, who created both Venus and Earth, and yet, in his incomprehensible mercy, chose to send his beloved and only Son to live here, on our small blue world, to rescue us from sin and give us eternal hope that transcends even the stars. This reveals something profoundly transformative about you, who are watching right now, in the eyes of the Creator of the universe, the one who formed galaxies with his hands, who lit stars with his word, who established the orbits of the planets. You are worth more than entire planets, more than complete solar systems, more than distant galaxies with their billions of stars. You are the reason Christ came. You are the reason the impossible became possible. You are the proof that God's love knows no limitations, neither of distance, nor of time, nor of circumstance. The Venusians discovered this truth as well in their golden nights of harmonic prayer, in their collective symphonies of gratitude that echoed through the acid clouds. They sang the same praise that echoes through the cosmos since the beginning of time, that God is infinitely greater than any hostile environment, infinitely more powerful than any impossible circumstance, infinitely more loving than any distance between worlds or stars. They learned that the same God who enabled them to flourish in a literal hell is the God who is working in your life today, at this very moment, to transform your impossible circumstances into testimonies of his glory, your seemingly insurmountable challenges into stories of victory that will inspire future generations. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah. If you have reached the end of this impossible journey, through the dreams of Venus, through the radical transformation of humanity, through the creation of civilization where there should have been only death, receive this special, personal and powerful blessing. You carry within you the same divine spark that made it possible to imagine life flourishing among the impossible stars. You have the same spiritual capacity to turn apparent impossibilities into inevitable testimonies of God's glory. You are more precious in the eyes of the Creator than any planet, more valuable than any scientific conquest, more loved than your finite mind can fully comprehend. The same God who created Venus and yet chose to save Earth is the God who knows every detail of your story, every tear you have shed, every dream you carry in your heart. He has plans for you that are bigger than your wildest imagination, more beautiful than your most optimistic dreams.